Hey coders, and welcome to another JavaScript for Complete Beginners. In this video, we're going to be diving into how to use objects in JavaScript. So like always, let's go ahead and look at a whiteboard example of what an object is. So I'm going to start off with an object called Bob, and then objects are going to be denoted with this rectangle. And objects in JavaScript can have properties, which we're going to denote with these circles. So I'm going to go ahead and add the property age to Bob and set it equal to the value of 21. We'll go ahead and give him another property called gender and assign that the value m, or the string m. And then lastly, we're going to go ahead and assign him a property called weight. And we can just go ahead and give him a value of 150. So one thing worth noting is at any point in your JavaScript code, if you have an object, you can go ahead and assign additional properties to it. So in the future, we can add even more properties if we find out that Bob decides he needs, pets or children or whatnot. We can also remove a property from an object at any time. So for instance, I can just delete this whole weight property, and then the object is back to what it was originally with age and gender. So another thing worth mentioning is that you can assign objects to objects. So if we were to add another property called pet, which is an object, we can then assign a name to the pet, which we can set as Lucy. And then we can also assign a property called age, which we can set to 5 on the pet. So now if we were to imagine if we had a variable called Bob and it was assigned to our object Bob, we can kind of show how the different properties can be accessed using that Bob variable. So for age, that would be accessed by bob.age. And just to show that we can overwrite the value of age, we can do bob.age equals 18, which if ran will go through here and change the memory or state of the Bob object. And then secondly, we can show how to access the pet object by doing bob.pet.age if you wanted to change the age of the pet. So lastly, I'm going to show you how to delete a property from an object. So using the keyword delete, and then followed by the full path to the property. When ran, JavaScript will delete the property off the object or set it to undefined. Now if we wanted to delete the pet property from Bob, we just go ahead and do delete bob.pet, which would just remove the entire leaf from that tree. So we went over how an object can have properties, and those properties can be strings, integers, objects. They can also be arrays, and they can also be functions themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and make another object called Bob and give it the property level, which is just going to be an integer set to 2. And then I'm also going to assign it a property called level up. And the level up property is going to be a function itself, which is going to affect the level property. And I'll denote a function with this diamond shape diagram. So on the right here, I'll actually write the pseudocode or the real code for the function. So function level up is going to take no parameters. And what it's going to do is call this dot level plus plus, which is going to increment the level by 1 when the function is invoked. So to demonstrate invoking this function, we can go ahead and do bob.levelup and call it like a normal function call. And what happens behind the scenes is that when level up is called, this refers to the Bob object that it's bound to. And then the property level is going to, of course, refer to the level that's defined on the far left of this graph. And all it's going to do is increment the 2 to 3 when the function is called. So let's go ahead and define a object using code. So we can do this with the keyword var, and then Bob is the name of our variable, equals opening curly brace, followed by the property name level, colon, the value 2, comma, another property name called level up, colon, and then we can do the keyword function, define the blank parameters, give it curly braces in the curly brace, and then finally in the last curly brace that starts on the first line. And I'll go ahead and show you that these curly braces line up. And then lastly, we can actually write the this dot level plus plus statement, which should be executed to increment the level of the object. And again, like we previously saw, this dot level is referring to the level property that's attached to the Bob object. So let's go ahead and start writing some code in our editor to see how this works with concrete examples. All right, so let's go ahead and try to implement some of the examples we did on the whiteboard. So the first one we can start with will be defining that object that was called, I think it's called Bob. So we do var Bob is equal to a new object. Again, the syntax is var Bob is the name of the variable equals starting curly brace and ending curly brace. And then we can define a list of properties. So we can do age, say 21, name, Bob, weight, 150, gender, we'll say M. So that's how you define an object. This is a very basic object which has properties. So since this is kind of simple, let's go ahead and move on to a more complex object where we can say, let's add a new property called it is my birthday, which is a function which, when executed, just does the age of Bob plus 1. So first off, I'll just go ahead and print out Bob just to see what it looks like. So again, run node space index.js, and we see that the object Bob has all of these properties attached to them with the same values. And then we also have a function attached to it, which is printed out as a function, it is my birthday. We can further change values like we demonstrated on the whiteboard. So Bob age is equal to 88, Bob gender is equal to F. So when we run this, we can see that the age is actually different because age on line 5 is getting overwritten and gender on line 8 is also being overwritten. So the last thing I'm going to demonstrate is running the function that's on Bob. So I can do Bob, it is my birthday. If I run that, we know that the age should be incremented to 22. So when I print this, age is now 22. Okay, so we covered declaring an object. We have property that's a string, properties that are integers, properties that are functions. We can do properties that are arrays, which we'll cover arrays later on. And then we can also have properties which are objects. So let's just say we have work info as a property, which is an object. We can do an address, etc. And then again, like in the example, if we decide we wanted to change Bob's work info or change the address, we can say bob.workinfo.address equals, I don't know, 123 Infinite Drive or something. I don't know. And again, clear that and run the program. We see that the address, workinfo.address, is now the updated address that we ran on line 20. Last thing I'll demonstrate that we also did in the whiteboard is we can add additional properties to any property that's inside the object. So I'll do bob.workinfo. Something else associated with the job title, I guess. We could say software engineer. And then we can also do years employed 10. So if I were to run all these, we see again that the original object did not have anything other than address attached to the work info. But now we have title and years employed attached to the work info. And then again, work info can have something else attached to it, which is an object, which again has another object nested. And this can keep going on and on and on. But I think for the most part, this is a good overview of how to define an object and all the different properties and types that you can have attached to objects. Again, you can have functions, arrays, you can have objects nesting objects, and then the basic primitive properties attached to objects. So now that we've created a couple of objects just using plain object definitions and assigning them to variables, what you can do is actually use functions as kind of like your constructors or factories to build up objects. So to kind of demonstrate that, I'll go ahead and just create a function called createCat, which takes a name and an age. And what this can do is it can return a new object which has those variables attached to it as properties. So I'll go ahead and say cat1 equals createCat Lucy 10, and then cat2, also go ahead and say createCat Lacey age 5. And then if I were to print both cat1 and cat2 out to the console, we see that this method is useful for creating us an object which can be assigned and later on used in our program. So we see here we have the first one, which is Lucy, and then the second object, which is Lacey. And then another way to kind of create objects is what you can do is declare a new object. For instance, I'll declare a cat object. I'll give it a create method, which again can return us name, age, type cat. And then down here we can do cat1 is equal to cat.create Lucy, I can do Lucky who's 5, and then cat2 create Lacey who's 10. And I'll go ahead and just print out cat1 and cat2 down here to demonstrate what happens with this alternative method for creating objects with a factory kind of approach. So the main point of doing something like this is sometimes you have objects that have a ton of repetitive values or functions attached to them. So it's useful to use some type of factory method to create objects for you to use in the future. Now the other approach that I'm not really going to cover in this tutorial, maybe I will later on, is using the class keyword or using the new keyword for kind of creating JavaScript classes and using prototypes and whatnot. But I feel like that's a little bit more complicated, and honestly I don't really even use that much during my day-to-day job. I think I use the factory method a lot more. Yeah, so I think that kind of wraps up how to use objects, how to declare objects, you know, the basics of what they can hold. So let's go ahead and move on to another video tutorial where I'm probably going to be covering arrays. Alright, thanks for watching, and again, if you have any suggestions or feedback, feel free to leave me a comment. Alright, see you next time.